The call came in at 2:37 a.m. An old house on the outskirts of town was fully engulfed in flames. Captain Ethan Blake barely had time to pull on his gear before they were racing down the empty streets, sirens wailing, slicing through the cold, foggy night. House fires were nothing new, but something about this one gnawed at him. Maybe it was the eerie stillness in the dispatcher's voice, or the way his gut twisted as they approached the scene. The house, a decrepit Victorian relic, stood isolated at the edge of town, its once grand silhouette now crumbling under the onslaught of roaring flames. The fire raged like a living thing, devouring the wooden bones of the house, sending embers spiraling into the sky like dying stars. Ethan barked orders as his crew worked in rhythm, hoses uncoiled, water blasting against the blaze, the familiar dance of a team seasoned by years of battle against the elements. But despite their efforts, the fire burned with an unnatural intensity, as if it didn't want to die. Then came the scream, a sound so raw and desperate it cut through the roar of the flames and froze Ethan in his tracks. "Help me!" A child's voice, faint but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" Ethan spun toward Chris, his partner, who stood rigid, eyes wide beneath his soot-smeared helmet. Chris nodded. "Yeah, I heard it." Without hesitation, they pushed inside, forcing their way through the suffocating smoke. The fire crackled angrily around them, but the voice called again, leading them deeper into the burning wreckage. "Help me!" Ethan charged forward, smashing through a half-collapsed doorway and into a bedroom untouched by the flames. His flashlight flickered across the room. Everything, walls, furniture, curtains, remained intact. The fire hadn't touched it. Yet in the middle of the room lay a body. A charred, blackened figure sprawled on the floor. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Jesus Christ!" Chris stumbled back, eyes locked on the grotesque form. How is that possible? This room, there's no fire damage." Ethan knelt cautiously, his heart hammering against his ribs. The body was completely burned, the flesh brittle and blackened, yet the air around it was ice cold. And then, the body twitched. Chris screamed and staggered back, nearly tripping over debris. No, I saw it move. I swear to God, Ethan, I saw it move." Ethan's instincts screamed at him to get out, but he couldn't look away. The air grew thick, pressing down on him, and in the back of his mind, he heard it again. "Help me," the voice whispered, but the body remained motionless. Back at the station, the unease hadn't left. The forensic team arrived hours later to process the scene, and their findings were worse than Ethan could have imagined. "The body's been here for weeks," the coroner said, removing his gloves with a shaky hand. "Maybe even longer." Ethan stared, his stomach churning. "That's impossible. We heard her. We heard someone." The coroner gave him a grim look. "Captain, there was no one alive in that house when you went in." Chris, sitting nearby with his head in his hands, muttered, "I know what I saw. That thing moved. It moved." The rest of the crew fell silent, but the unease in the room was palpable. They'd all heard the voice. The nightmares started soon after. Ethan would wake drenched in sweat, the whispering voice looping in his ears like a broken record. "Help me, help me." In his dreams, he was back in that untouched room, the charred figure reaching for him, crawling out of the ashes with empty, blackened eye sockets. Chris, too, was unraveling. He began avoiding fires altogether, taking desk shifts and finding excuses to stay behind. One night, after too many drinks, he confessed to Ethan, his voice a raw whisper. "I see it everywhere, man. In the smoke, in my reflection. I think it followed us." Ethan tried to brush it off, but deep down, he felt it too. The weight of something unnatural pressing against his chest. Like the fire wasn't fully extinguished, like it had burrowed into him, waiting. Weeks later, another call came in. A house fire across town, eerily similar to the first. As they arrived, Ethan's blood ran cold. The house layout was almost identical. The way the fire moved, the way the smoke billowed, everything felt wrong. And then he heard it. The same voice. "Help me!" His grip tightened on his axe. No, it couldn't be. Not again. He exchanged a glance with Chris, who looked pale as a ghost. "It's her," Chris whispered. "She's here." They pushed inside, And as they navigated the burning halls, Ethan felt it. Something moving just beyond the flames, a presence watching, waiting. When they reached the back bedroom, it was exactly the same, untouched, and in the middle of the room, another body, burnt to a crisp, unmoving, yet somehow still alive in the flickering shadows. Ethan staggered back, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't just a fire, this was something else, something ancient, something hungry. Chris's radio crackled to life with static, and through the distortion, they heard it again. "You'll never leave." The smoke thickened, curling around them like fingers. The body on the floor twitched just as it had before, and the fire roared to life with renewed fury. Ethan grabbed Chris by the arm. "We need to go, now!" They ran, stumbling out into the cool night air, coughing and gasping. The fire burned on, but it felt different now, less like destruction and more like something else trying to come through. Ethan handed in his resignation the next morning. Chris followed soon after. Some things, they decided, were better left burning. Some fires weren't meant to be extinguished, but even as he drove away from the station for the last time, Ethan couldn't escape it. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, and when he picked it up, his breath hitched. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Silence on the other end, and then, in that same trembling voice, "Help me." Ethan dropped the phone, his hands trembling. The fire might have been put out, but something was still out there, waiting.